Hi, I'm Rashonda Cade, and this is Reading with Rashonda. We are reading Harriet E. Wilson's Our Nig. We're on Chapter 3. I'm into it and excited. I hope you are as well. So here goes, Chapter 3. A new home for me. Oh, did we but know of the shadow so nigh, the world would indeed be a prison of gloom. All light would be quenched in youth's eloquent eye, and the prayer-lisping infant would ask for the tomb. For if hope be a star that may lead us astray, and deceiveth the heart as the aged ones preach, yet 'twas mercy that gave it to beacon our way, though its halo illumes where it never can reach. Eliza Cook. As the day closed and Mag did not appear, surmises were expressed by the family that she never intended to return. Mr. Belmont was a kind, humane man who would not grudge hospitality to the poorest wanderer, nor fail to sympathize with any sufferer, however humble. The child's desertion by her mother appealed to his sympathy, and he felt inclined to succor her. To do this in opposition to Mrs. Belmont's wishes would be like encountering a whirlwind charged with fire, daggers, and spikes. She was not as susceptible of fine emotions as her spouse. Mag's opinion of her was not without foundation. She was self-willed, haughty, undisciplined, arbitrary, and severe. In common parlance, she was a scold, a thorough one. Mr. B. remained silent during the consultation which follows, engaged in by Mother, Mary, and John, or Jack as he was familiarly called. "Send her to the county house," said Mary, in reply to the query what should be done with her, in a tone which indicated self-importance in the speaker. She was indeed the idol of her mother, and more nearly resembled in her disposition and manners than the others. Jane, an invalid daughter, the eldest of those at home, was reclining on a sofa, apparently uninterested. "Keep her," said Jack. "She's real handsome and bright, and not very black either." "Yes," rejoined Mary, "that's just like you, Jack. She'll be of no use at all these 3 years, right underfoot all the time." "Pah, Miss Mary! If she should stay, it shouldn't be 2 days before you would be telling the girls about our nig." "Our nig," retorted Jack. "I don't want a nigger round me, do you, Mother?" asked Mary. "I don't mind the nigger and the child. I should like a dozen better than one," replied her mother. "If I could make her do my work in a few years, I would keep her. I have so much trouble with girls I hire. I am almost persuaded if I have one to train up in my way from a child, I shall be able to keep them a while. I am tired of changing every few months." "Where could she sleep?" asked Mary. "I don't want her near me." "In the L chamber," answered the mother. "How'll she get there?" asked Jack. "She'll be afraid to go through that dark passage, and she can't climb the ladder safely." "She'll have to go there. It's good enough for a nigger," was the reply. Jack was sent on horseback to ascertain if Mag was at home. He returned with the testimony of Pete Green that they were fairly departed, and that the child was intentionally thrust upon their family. The imposition was not at all relished by Mr. B. or the pert, haughty Mary, who had just glided into her teens. "Show the child to bed, Jack," said his mother. "You seem most pleased with the little nigger, so you may introduce her to her room." He went to the kitchen, and taking Fredo gently by the hand, told her he would put her in bed now. Perhaps her mother would come the next night after her. It was not yet quite dark, so they ascended the stairs without any light, passing through nicely furnished rooms, which were a source of great amazement to the child. He opened the door, which connected with her room by a dark, unfinished passageway. "Don't bump your head," said Jack, and stepped before to open the door leading into her apartment, an unfinished chamber over the kitchen, the roof slanting nearly to the floor, so that the bed could stand only in the middle of the room. A small half-window furnished light and air. Jack returned to the sitting room with the remark that the child would soon outgrow those quarters. "When she does, she'll outgrow the house," remarked the mother. "Dang. You can live inside as long as you can fit in this tiny space. Once you can't fit in the tiny space, you live outside." I feel so sad for her. All right, let's keep reading. "What can she do to help you?" asked Mary. She came just in the right time, didn't she? Just the very day after Bridget left," she continued. "I'll see what she can do in the morning," was the answer. While this conversation was passing below, Fredo lay revolving in her little mind whether she would remain or not until her mother's return. I like that about Fredo. She was like, "No, I'm not going with you. I'm going to run away. I mean, I'm not saying I want my children to be like that, but I like that she's of her own mind. Anyway, she was of willful, determined nature, a stranger to fear, and would not hesitate to wander away should she decide to. She remembered the conversation of her mother with Seth, the words given away, which she heard used in reference to herself, and though she did not know their full import, she thought she should, by remaining, be in some relation to white people she was never favored with before. Oh, so she thinks these people are her family. That's going to give her a really skewed view of what family can be, but I guess she already has that, for mom gave her away. So she resolved to tarry with the hope that mother would come and get her sometime. The hot sun had penetrated her room, and it was long before a cooling breeze reduced the temperature so that she could sleep. Freda was called early in the morning by her new mistress. Her first work was to feed the hens. She was shown how it was always to be done, and in no other way. Any departure from this rule to be punished by a whipping. She was then accompanied by Jack to drive the cows to pasture, so she might learn the way. Upon her return, she was allowed to eat her breakfast, consisting of a bowl of skimmed milk with brown bread crusts, which she was told to eat, standing, by the kitchen table, and must not be over 10 minutes about it. Meanwhile, the family were taking their morning meal in the dining room. This over, she was placed on a cricket. I don't know what a cricket is. It sounds like a step stool. This over, she was placed on a cricket to wash the common dishes. She was to be in waiting always to bring wood and chips to run hither and thither from room to room. A large amount of dishwashing for small hands followed dinner. Then the same after tea, and going after the cows, finished her first day's work. It was a new discipline to the child. She found some attractions about the place, and she retired to rest at night more willing to remain. The same routine followed day after day with slight variation, adding a little more work and spicing the toil with words that burn and frequent blows on the head. These were great annoyances to Fredo, and had she known where her mother was, she would have gone at once to her. She was often greatly wearied and silently wept over her sad fate. At first she wept aloud, which Mrs. Belmont noticed by applying a raw hide always at hand in the kitchen. You cry, you get whipped. You don't work, you get whipped. It was a symptom of discontent and complaining which must be nipped in the bud, she said. Thus passed a year. No intelligence of Mag. It was now certain Freda was to become a permanent member of the family. Her labors were multiplied. She was quite indispensable, although but 7 years old. She had never learned to read, never heard of a school until her residence in the family. Mrs. Belmont was in doubt about the utility of attempting to educate people of color who were incapable of elevation. This subject occasioned a lengthy discussion in the family. Mr. Belmont, Jane, and Jack arguing for Fredo's education, Mary and Mother objecting. At last, Mr. Belmont declared decisively that she should go to school. He was a man who seldom decided controversies at home. The word once spoken admitted of no appeal. So, notwithstanding Mary's objection that she would have to attend the same school she did, the word became law. It was to be a new scene to Fredo, and Jack had many queries and conjectures to answer. He was himself too far advanced to attend the summer school, which Fredo regretted, having had too many opportunities of witnessing Miss Mary's temper to feel safe in her company alone. The opening day of school came. Fredo sauntered on far in the rear of Mary, who was ashamed to be seen walking with a nigger. As soon as she appeared with scanty clothing and bared feet, the children assembled noisily published her approach. "See that nigger?" shouted one. "Look, look!" cried another. "I won't play with her," said one little girl. "Nor I neither," replied another. Mary evidently relished these sharp attacks and saw a fair prospect of lowering Nig where, according to her views, she belonged. Poor Fredo, chagrined and grieved, felt that her anticipations of pleasure at such a place were far from being realized. She was just deciding to return home and never come there again when the teacher appeared, and observing the downcast looks of the child, took her by the hand and led her into the schoolroom. All followed, and after the bustle of securing seats was over, Miss Marsh inquired if the children knew any cause for the sorrow of that little girl, pointing to Fredo. It was soon all told. She then reminded them of their duties to the poor and friendless, their cowardice in attacking a young innocent child, referred them to one who looks not on outward appearances but on the heart. She looks like a good girl. I think I shall love her, so lay aside all prejudice and vie with each other in showing kindness and goodwill to one who seems different from you, were the closing remarks of the kind lady. Those kind words, the most agreeable sound which ever meets the ear of sorrowing, grieving childhood. Example rendered her words efficacious. Day by day there was a manifest change of deportment towards Nig. She has a name, though. It's Fredo. Her speeches often drew merriment from the children. No one could do more to enliven their favorite pastimes than Fredo. Oh, gracious. So now she's putting on a show, and they look to her for the show. That's always a thrill. Mary could not endure to see her thus noticed, yet knew not how to prevent it. She could not influence her schoolmates as she wished. She had not gained their affections by winning ways and yielding points of controversy. On the contrary, she was self-willed, domineering, every day reported mad by some of her companions. She availed herself of the only alternative, abuse and taunts, as they returned from school. This was not satisfactory. She wanted to use physical force to subdue her, to keep her down. Why you gotta keep Fredo down? There was, on their way home, a field intersected by a stream over which a single plank was placed for crossing. It occurred to Mary that it would be a punishment to Nig to compel her to cross over, so she dragged her to the edge and told her authoritatively to go over. Nig hesitated and resisted. Mary placed herself behind the child and, in the struggle to force her over, lost her footing and plunged into the stream. Some of the larger scholars, being in sight, ran and thus prevented Mary from drowning and Fredo from falling. Nig scampered home fast as possible, and Mary went to the nearest house, dripping, to procure a change of garments. She came loitering home, half crying, exclaiming, "Nig pushed me into the stream!" She then related the particulars. Nig was called from the kitchen. Mary stood with anger flashing in her eyes. Mr. Belmont sat quietly reading his paper. He had witnessed too many of Miss Mary's outbreaks to be startled. Mrs. Belmont interrogated Nig. "I didn't do it! I didn't do it!" answered Nig passionately, and then related the occurrence, truthfully. The discrepancy greatly enraged Mrs. Belmont. With loud accusations and angry gestures, she approached the child. Turning to her husband, she asked, "Will you sit still there and hear that black nigger call Mary a liar?" "How do we know but she has told the truth?" "I shall not punish her," he replied, and left the house, as he usually did when a tempest threatened to envelop him. He was probably like, "Mary lies all the time. I imagine she's lying about this too. But since it's getting hot in here, I'ma leave." No sooner was he out of sight than Mrs. B and Mary commenced beating her inhumanly, then propping her mouth open with a piece of wood, shut her up in a dark room without any supper. They propped her mouth open with a piece of wood? What? For employment while the tempest raged within, Mr. Belmont went for the cows, a task belonging to Fredo, and thus unintentionally prolonged her pain. At dark, Jack came in and, seeing Mary, accosted her with, "So you thought you'd vent your spite on Nig, did you? Why can't you let her alone? It was good enough for you to get a ducking, only you did not stay in half long enough." That is certainly what a sibling, I was going to say a brother, but a sibling would say. It doesn't matter if it's brother or sister. "Stop," said his mother. "You shall never talk so before me. You would have that little nigger trample on Mary, would you? She came home with a lie. It made Mary's story false." "What was Mary's story?" asked Jack. "It was related." "Now," said Jack, sallying into a chair, "the school children happen to see it all, and they tell me the same story Nig does, which is most likely to be true. What a dozen agree they saw, or the contrary." "It is very strange you will believe what others say against your sister," retorted his mother with flashing eye. "I think it is time your father subdued you." Father is a sensible man, argued Jack. He would not wrong a dog. Where is Fredo? He continued. Mother gave her a good whipping and shut her up, replied Mary. Just then Mr. Belmont entered and asked if Fredo was shut up yet. The knowledge of her innocence, the perfidy of his sister, worked fearfully on Jack. He bounded from his chair, searched every room till he found the child, her mouth wedged apart, her face swollen and full of pain. How Jack pitied her! He relieved her jaws, brought her some supper, took her to her room, comforted her as well as he knew how, sat by her till she fell asleep, and then left for the sitting room. As he passed his mother, he remarked, if that was the way Fredo was to be treated, he hoped she would never wake again. He then imparted her situation to his father, who seemed untouched, till the glance at Jack exposed a tearful eye. Jack went early to her next morning. She awoke sad but refreshed. After breakfast, Jack took her with him to the field and kept her through the day. But it could not be so generally. She must return to school, to her household duties. He resolved to do what he could to protect her from Mary and his mother. He bought her a dog, which became a great favorite with both. The invalid Jane would gladly befriend her, but she had not the strength to brave the iron will of her mother. Kind words and affectionate glances were the only expressions of sympathy she could safely indulge in. The men employed on the farm were always glad to hear her prattle. She was a great favorite with them. Mrs. Belmont allowed them the privilege of talking with her in the kitchen. She did not fear but she should have ample opportunity of subduing her when they were away. 3 months of schooling, summer and winter, she enjoyed for 3 years. Her winter overdress was a cast-off overcoat once worn by Jack and a sunbonnet. Really? That's what she wore, is a coat and a hat? Okay. It was a source of great merriment to the scholars, but Nick's retorts were so mirthful and their satisfaction so evident in attributing the selection to old Granny Belmont that it was not painful to Nig or pleasurable to Mary. Okay, so Fredo, by force of necessity, has to be the entertainment for her schoolmates. The teacher stepped in and was like, we're going to treat her well. But she being Fredo, learned that humor was how she could wrap herself up and not feel all of the taunts and things. She's not the first person to do that, certainly not the last. But it's sad. And then that becomes who she is, right? The person who makes people laugh. And that person rarely gets a chance to be anybody else besides the person who makes people laugh. And the minute they start showing feelings and something besides levity, then everybody turns on them. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. I've not read the book, but I've seen that happen often enough. And a lot of Black people have to turn to that even now. I've got a lot swirling in my head. Angry Black women, masculinity, humor, a ton of stuff. But we're almost done with this chapter, so I'm going to keep reading. Her being Fredo. Her jollity was not to be quenched by whipping or scolding. In Mrs. Belmont's presence, she was under restraint. But in the kitchen and among her schoolmates, the pent-up fires burst forth. She was ever at some sly prank when unseen by her teacher in school hours. Not unfrequently some outburst of merriment, of which she was the original, was charged upon some innocent mate, and punishment inflicted which she merited. They enjoyed her antics so fully that any of them would suffer wrongfully to keep open the avenues of mirth. She would venture far beyond propriety, thus shielded and countenanced. And it's working so well. This is sad. The teacher's desk was supplied with drawers in which were stored the books and other et ceteras of the profession. The children observed Nig very busy there one morning after school as they flitted in occasionally from their play outside. The master came, called the children to order, opened a drawer to take the book the occasion required, when out poured a volume of smoke. "Fire! Fire!" screamed he at the top of his voice. By this time I thought the teacher was a woman. Yes, Miss Marsh was the teacher. Okay, so the master, I guess, is somebody different than the teacher. I guess the person who employs the teacher? All right. The master came, called the children to order, opened a drawer to take the book the occasion required, when out poured a volume of smoke. Fire! Fire! He screamed at the top of his voice. By this time he had become sufficiently acquainted with the peculiar odor to know he was imposed upon. The scholars shouted with laughter to see the terror of the dupe, who, feeling abashed at the needless fright, made no very strict investigation, and Nig once more escaped punishment. She had provided herself with cigars, and puffing away at the crack of the drawer, had filled it with smoke, and then closed it tightly to deceive the teacher and amuse the scholars. The interim of terms was filled up with a variety of duties new and peculiar. At home, no matter how powerful the heat when sent to rake hay or guard the grazing herd, she was never permitted to shield her skin from the sun. She was not many shades darker than Mary now. At home, no matter how powerful the heat, she was never permitted to shield her. She was not many shades darker than Mary now. What a calamity it would be ever to hear the contrast spoken of. Mrs. Belmont was determined the sun should have full power to darken the shade which nature had first bestowed upon her as best befitting. So, I'm not sure what's up with the teacher. It's been a few years. Maybe they have a new teacher and this teacher is a man. But Mrs. Belmont wants to distinguish between Mary and Fredo by making Fredo stay outside in the sun. She previously was supplied with a bonnet, but I guess now her bonnet has been taken away from her to darken the shade which nature has first bestowed upon her as best befitting. And that was chapter 3 of Our Nig by Harriet E. Wilson. I'm Rashonda Cade, and this is Reading with Rashonda.